In conclusion, Light Yagami is the best anime character of all time, past and future generations. Matter of fact, he is the best character in fiction. A great protagonist and story can give shape to a terrific anime, but sometimes an exceptional villain is what steals the show. The two most important characters in almost any story are the protagonist and antagonist, the hero and the villain. This holds true in the majority of anime. However, sometimes the villain is overlooked in favor of the cool, unbeatable hero. When something like this happens, it can be really disappointing because in some cases, the villains are the ones that make the show. An important question is then raised. What makes a good villain? This can be quite the extensive topic, so I'll boil down my answer to 3 main points. A good villain must be a true character and not a plot device. They must have some sort of sympathetic quality to them, and they need to be threatening. Because of the nature of this topic, there will be some slight spoilers for how several different villains develop and what happens to them. The spoilers are gonna be for the following series: JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Diamond is Unbreakable Part 4, which has my favorite JoJo, Josuke, Death Note, Akame ga Kill, and Overlord. I am very, very crazy, very, One of the most important parts of making a good villain is somehow getting the viewer to remember that the villain is a character too. Just because they're a villain doesn't mean that they are devoid of hopes and dreams. Most villains are just people who took the wrong path and happened to oppose the hero. A great example comes from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Diamond is Unbreakable, and the character's name is Yoshikage Kira, probably one of my favorite anime villains. Yoshikage Kira is by all accounts your everyman. He enjoys nothing more than living the most normal, average life possible. Yoshikage puts it best himself when he gives a speech to one of the heroes. The speech is quite extensive and he talks about his daily routine while revealing simple facts about himself. If you haven't seen the show, you probably would never guess that Kira is also a serial killer who blows up young women and takes their hands. Yes, he literally takes their dismembered hands. The reason this is not immediately apparent is because he is also a human being. Just like the protagonist of an anime, he's not wholly defined by his darker side. Kira is plagued by an irresistible desire to kill people. But if he didn't have this desire, it's likely he'd never hurt anyone. More shocking than his guise, however, is the reason he gives for fighting the protagonists of the story. He says, "I take care not to trouble myself with any enemies, like winning or losing. That would cause me to lose sleep at night. Basically, you're a troublesome thing that would hinder my sleep, therefore my enemy." To Kira, the protagonists of the story are threatening his way of life. To Kira, they are the villains. There seems to be a misconception in a lot of anime that the audience should always root against the villain. Even so, I found myself rooting for my favorite villains in anime. For example, take Light Yagami from Death Note, one of my favorite anime characters and probably one of the best anime villains of all time. Now, many people consider Light to be more of an anti-hero rather than a villain. While I wouldn't say this is inaccurate given the story's point of view, being the protagonist is different from being a hero. Even though Light Yagami is the protagonist, Light is L's villain in terms of the story's conflict and plot. As many consider L to be the hero of the story, this only leaves Light to be the villain. And he follows many of the trends of being a villain. Light Yagami is the owner of the Death Note, a notebook that kills anyone whose name is written in it. He starts out as a simple student that just happened to stumble across the notebook one day. He is disgusted with the injustice in the world and, after learning of the notebook's power, begins using it to kill people who he thinks deserve it, namely criminals. However, as the story progresses, Light's conviction and pride grow until he begins to see himself as a godlike figure, killing anyone who opposes his crusade.
I have become justice, the only hope for mankind.
While Light undoubtedly becomes the villain of Death Note, the story is centered around him and not around the people who are trying to stop him. Throughout the show, I genuinely wanted Light to win. Not because of what he was doing, but because I cared about him as a character and his noble intentions. To be a good character, a villain needs to evoke sympathy and understanding. After all, as stated before, villains have their own reasons for doing what they do. This doesn't mean everyone has to agree with their reasons, but it should be presented in such a way that you can respect it, whether you agree with it or not. So far, I've talked about a good villain being characterized by a well thought out personality and general likability. While these characteristics are important, neither of them will distinguish a villain from a protagonist. The last and most important aspect of a villain is that they have to be dangerous. In one of his author's notes, Hirohiko Araki, the sole writer and creator of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, says that an enemy who does bad things is a person who has a spiritual weakness. And what's truly scary is when someone takes that weakness and uses it to lash out against others. Ultimately, a bad person is someone who fails to overcome the flaws in their personality and allows themselves to be controlled by said flaws. However, they become a villain when they are dangerous on top of that. A good villain almost always needs to be more powerful and or more intelligent than the hero throughout most, if not all, of the story. After all, if the hero is not afraid of the villain, then why should the viewer be? A villain can either be cunning or powerful. The type of advantage the author gives the villain can completely change the genre of the anime. Light Yagami is more intelligent than just about everyone in Death Note. In fact, I'd argue he's the most intelligent character in all of fiction. This makes Death Note a psychological thriller. Alternatively, you can just have a villain that is more powerful than the heroes, who can just be as dangerous. A villain that exemplifies this is Esdeath from Akame ga Kill. Throughout Akame ga Kill, Esdeath is built up to be the most powerful character in the entire show. There are a few points in the show where you're able to see this in action. In these instances, you see Esdeath freeze an entire attack force or instantly defeat gigantic monsters. These scenes convey the ridiculous power that Esdeath has, which helps to establish her not only as an extremely dangerous character, but also as the iconic villain of Akame ga Kill, even though she's not actually the main villain of the anime. If Esdeath wasn't as powerful as she was, the villains in the show would have been far less threatening. On top of that, Esdeath herself would be much less interesting as a character. This last point may seem like common knowledge. However, with her power, she serves as a looming doom that the audience knows the heroes will have to deal with, even if they're not sure how. A villain needs to pose some sort of threat to the protagonist. If this is not the case, then the villain can come off as just another grunt for the hero to crush. This was the case with Clementine, a minor villain in the anime Overlord. By no means is Clementine a bad character. In fact, she's a pretty fun and interesting villain. She was full of witty comments and is backed by really good voice actors, both in English and Japanese. But she'll never really be a good villain. The main reason behind this is that she's pitifully weak compared to the protagonist. The result of their fight was really disappointing, and it didn't give Clementine the time to shine. Whoa, that rhymes. Of course, Overlord is designed to be a kind of a wish fulfillment anime, so it's no real surprise that the fight was one-sided. Something I should also add on is that there has to be something at stake if the villain were to win. Something more than the fact that the hero loses. Unless, of course, the death of the hero would have severe consequences. The thing at stake does not necessarily have to be planetary scale destruction. It could be as simple as the loss of a few lives, as was the case with Yoshikage Kira. So, in conclusion, good character traits, a certain level of charm, and of course a sense of threat and danger can transform a mediocre, forgettable villain into a great villain and a great character overall. A great villain is almost essential in a great anime. Of course, there are some exceptions to the qualities that I presented. A lot of comedies and other anime are less focused on a villain and have no specific villain at all sometimes. Despite that, everyone enjoys a good villain, and I hope to see more in the future. Thanks for watching the video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Let's see. Speed of Sound Sonic. He is a pretty good character. Is a villain to begin with because he just tries fighting Saitama and just gets fucking destroyed. So I don't even know. But it's a pretty good villain.